Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. I recognise there are a few more trickling in, so hopefully everybody will be with us in the next minute or so. Happy ASB Awareness Week. We've got, my name's Katie Anderson. I'm a partner at G&B ASB Associates. This is the first webinar I've been chairing, so bear with me if there's any technical glitches throughout the morning. Hopefully we can sort them all out. Can we do a brief round of introductions before I do some housekeeping? I think that would be useful. So Joe, did you want to come in?
Yes, again, happy ASB week. So all the fun of the fair starting this morning. So good morning, everyone. Joe Grimshaw. I work for Surrey Police and I have a very long title, which is Head of Antisocial Behaviour, Youth Engagement, Partnerships and Tactical Lead for Serious Violence. I think it's because I've been here 24 years, as much as it is for my my expertise and my knowledge. I'm picking up a few bits. But from an ASB point of view, I'm the tactical lead for the force, which means that I try and hold the chief and everyone else to account that victims of ASB are just as important as victims of crime, but also work with the Partnership of Surrey, who at the moment are two-tiered, but very soon to become two unitary authorities. So again, trying to balance that transitional stage with our partners is also taking up a bit of my time at the moment. But yeah, glad to be here, Katie.
Fabulous. Thanks, Joe. Can I come to Sharon, please?
Yes, morning everyone. My name's Sharon Murphy. I'm an associate with G&B and I have been for some time, for several years actually, since it was Janine.
You're the oldest associate, Sharon.
Yes, yeah, the original. But I also have a day job. I'm head of neighbourhoods with Orbit. Some of you may have heard of Orbit Housing Association, and I joined Orbit just well, coming up to a year ago. My background is firmly footed in a local authority setting, sort of 25 years or so, with one of the London boroughs, in a range of roles, starting as a housing officer and then finding my lane in ASB and community safety. And yeah, so just really loving that lane. And that's really it. That's me.
Fabulous, Sharon. And last but not least, but my co-chair today, Eva, did you want to come in?
Oh, absolutely. I love being last but not least. Perfect. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. So my name is Eva Payton-White, and I'm one of the senior learning consultants here at Me Learning. And I specialise in supporting our social housing sector customers. So Me Learning is a digital training company, and we are currently partnering with organisations like Green and Burton to develop ASB e-learning courses. So whilst I do not have a direct background in ASB, I work extensively with housing teams to design training that best supports effective learning outcomes. So I'll be here today to talk about how we can hopefully utilise some lessons learned in the ASB world to develop effective training methods and ensure sort of ASB officers and the sector itself receives the right learning from the very beginning. So yeah, thank you. Lovely to meet you all.
Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to crack on with some of the boring stuff and the housekeeping before we make it a start. You'll recognise that actually you can only see us four on the screen. The rest of you are just initials. We'd love to see your faces, but we've got quite a large number of people on the screen and you'd literally be like dots. So you are, apologies, so no cameras on, and you've all been muted, simply because we can't cope with that vast amount of questions because we've only got an hour to spare. But the chat is available should anyone, I know there's been some comments already, just some introductions, please feel free to use the chat. If you have any questions we don't get round to answering, what we will do afterwards is put a briefing document with some frequent questions answered on there. We haven't got any slides to share this morning. We're going to keep it as an informal chat. obviously the purpose of today is we've gone to our associates. Obviously Sharon is one of them here today, but we've gone out to our associates to ask for their gems of advice, what they wish they would have known. So there's a song there, isn't there? What I wish that I knew what I know now. Is that a song? I think it is.
I'll look it up for you, Katie.
Katie, don't sing it, whatever you do.
I won't sing it.
The call will just drop off.
I won't subject you to that, but yeah. So kind of those gems of advice that you've learned along the way that actually could have been really, really useful to know at the start of our ASB careers. The webinar is being recorded, so that will be available afterwards, whether that's on our website or if you've signed up to our newsletter as well, it will be available through there. This is our first of 5 sessions too, so if you haven't seen the other 4 that are on every day this week, then please check them out and absolutely join those. I think that's it in a nutshell, unless I've missed something off. So I'm going to pass my baton over to Eva to fire away with the first gem and get the conversation flowing.
Thanks, Katie. So the first sort of gem we received from G&B's associates was from Rochelle. So it's all around recording your rationale, not just your actions. So Rochelle said, document not only what you did, but why you did it. So anyone reviewing the case can understand your decision making and the proportionality decisions behind your actions. It's a perfect jam to start off with. So my first question is going to be to Sharon this morning. So Sharon, we often say if it's not written down, it doesn't happen. It didn't happen. And ask people to record actions. So, so why is the extra step of recording rationale? So why is that really important in case management, that why element?
Well, you have answered that already within the question, because essentially, if it's not written down, it may as well have not happened. It's a really big part of our role and is often really underestimated. Actions tell you what happened. Your rationale tells you why it was the right thing to do and why you made the decision on that day. And the distinction between the two really matters. If we think about this in terms of examples, let's think about a noise case. It's not enough to just write case closed, didn't meet the threshold. That's not enough. That doesn't explain your decision. If you were to record that in a different way, you could show that you visited at relevant times, various times, you reviewed diary sheets, you reviewed noise recordings, you assessed the frequency and the severity, and ultimately concluded through reviewing all of those that the threshold wasn't met. That tells a story of professional judgment. And that is what recording rationale is all about. If a decision is ever challenged, and lots of us have decisions challenged, rightly, wrongly, whether that's through a complaint, through the Ombudsman, and if a case does go down that legal route, you can guarantee it will come under legal scrutiny. It's not your activity log that is going to defend you. It's your rationale. Saying that you visited isn't going to stand up as being a comprehensive investigation, but explaining what you found, what you considered, and why you made that decision absolutely will. Your case notes protect not only your organisation, but they protect you. Cases are sometimes picked up months later, sometimes by someone that's never met that resident, customer, tenant, whatever your organisation calls them. And your recorded rationale helps to them to understand what your thinking was at that time and can spare lots of embarrassing, can you go over that? Can you repeat? Can you repeat? Which all depletes trust and doesn't show any of us in a positive light. When you're recording your rationale, it shows professionalism. If you make a decision that mediation is more appropriate than enforcement at that time, your notes need to explain why it was proportionate to make that suggestion, what the risks were, what you considered, what was the outcome you were aiming for. If you record all of that, it might not get you to where you thought it was going to get you, but it justifies your decision making at that time as to why you took that path. So good recording isn't just about compliance, it's about defensibility, transparency, and demonstrating that our decisions are thoughtful, that they are evidence-based, and that they are fair. And that, in a nutshell, is the long answer to your very short question, Eva.
No, that's perfect. I love that. I think, you know, thoughtful, evidence-based and fair. It's just, if you kind of stick with those three attributes, you know, you're on for winner, aren't you? Thank you so much, Sharon. That's really, really helpful.
Absolutely. Can I just come in there? Sorry, Eva,
course,
to just say, to add to that, actually, it makes life easier as well when you get to, if things go to enforcement and you're writing a statement and having to reflect back on your decision making at that time. We all know that your memory fades with time passing on, but actually, if you've documented that rationale all the way through, writing up that proportionality assessment and actually putting a good statement together as to why you're going for the action you're going for, with that history and background of why you've made those decisions all along the way, just makes statement writing so much easier and putting that case forward.
And it doesn't have to be War and Peace. It doesn't, you know, you're not looking for 500
No.
words when you're recording your rationale. It's a few notes about, you know, couldn't see, you know, the frequency or whatever it was that you are, it's noting. You're noting. Recording is noting. It's not essays. So this shouldn't be arduous. This isn't something that you haven't got time for. It's completely doable.
Yeah, absolutely, build it in. Sorry, I came in there. Back to you, Eva.
No, it's perfect. Invaluable stuff. So our second gem is from Emma, and she sort of discusses risk assessments being used as a decision-making tool. So it's very short and sweet, and she just says, don't complete a risk assessment, use it, with the big exclamation mark at the end. So we've got a couple of questions on this, and the first one I really wanted to pose to Jo. So Jo, what do you see as the common pitfalls when we see in the use of risk assessments, and how can officers use them better?
So I love the fact that Emma is that one-liner. Don't just complete it, use it. You know, I probably couldn't sum it up better than that. But I think risk assessments have their place, and I think it helps us to maybe take a step back from maybe a case that we're working on that's become, you know, all-encompassing, and the risk assessment helps you to kind of maybe reevaluate what's been going on. But for me, the most important thing is the so what. The so what when you've done that risk assessment. You know, are you just doing that risk assessment to tick a box that you've done a risk assessment? That you've done a risk assessment to tell that victim that actually, you know, it's not high. In regards to the risk assessment, says it's not high, and that's how it's going to make you decide what you do next. And I think also it's about, for me, is if you are using a risk assessment at the moment, when was the last time you reviewed it? Things have changed. So we know from a policing point of view, 2007 and the tragic death of Fiona and her daughter made police probably for the first time look at how we risk assess antisocial behaviour. For years we were risk assessing other types of crime, but ASB probably for the first time was when there was that additional work that was put in. And what you will see today from a police point of view is there's at least one risk assessment that's used, but that one predominantly is around whether we're going to deploy or not. So it's that first call that comes into the call centre. So from a policing point of view, slightly different world to maybe housing providers, local authority, because we are taking those 999 calls or 101s. But again, really important that we understand what the victim is saying to us, or the witness is saying, is to make sure that if we're going to deploy, that we deploy at the right time, so on 3 9s with the blue lights going, or are we going to, it's competing about other things, so we will get there within a certain time, or are we going to pass it on to the safer neighbourhood teams to have a look at, maybe later on in the day or the next day. But again, making sure that we don't miss those calls that are coming in, making sure importantly that, excuse me, we make sure to see whether people are repeat as well as vulnerable, because again, that's really important. It's that drip, drip, drip effect, which again, I think sometimes we can all get compassion fatigue, and we maybe don't see that it's just the noisy kids kicking the football at the gable end for the 40th time. But what a risk assessment does, hopefully, is reset to say that actually this is really important. The reason this is happening this amount of times means that we need to be doing something with that risk assessment. But again, for me, it's about the so what. So again, when you're looking at using a risk assessment, is you sit hopefully with your victim. I think sitting with a risk assessment and talking through the victim can be really useful to kind of build trust and confidence that you're listening and you're asking, how does it feel? How does it make you feel? So it's making sure you have the correct questions to help with that kind of reassurance. But then it's kind of the so what. So you've got a standard response because the computer's done the maths behind the Excel spreadsheet, or if you're a little bit more techie, there's an online system, so you actually don't see the whirling going behind there. What if it's high? It's not a case of, well, it's high, I'll put that in my notes and we'll look at it a little bit later on. I think for me, it's really important for officers, that's whether it's police officers, housing officers, that there is that so what within your risk assessment. So if it is graded as high, there are things that you need to probably do before you leave that house, before you leave that victim. If it's standard, there are still things that we need to do. Standard doesn't mean to say that there isn't an issue and that people aren't being impacted. But what it means is that we probably don't need to do something as an emergency. So maybe we don't need to look at moving someone away for the time being to keep them safe, or whether from a policing point of view, we need to put on some extra patrols while we dig down into that issue a little bit further. But for me, Emma's quite right. Use it. Don't just put it in an evidential pack or wherever your case management tools are kept, and just think your job's done because you filled out the risk assessment. So for me, it is use it, but also if you've been using the same one for a long time, you might just want to look at the mechanics behind it and how it's giving you that standard, medium, high response.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Shannon. It's similar to sort of how Sharon's answer is. I keep calling you Shannon. I'm so sorry, Sharon. To Sharon's answer, it's the same. It's not just using it for a compliance tool. It's actually what are you doing with it beyond, it's just ticking a box per se. So obviously within the policing world, you have different risk assessments. How do you feel that you can use those differing assessments to better evidence harm and demonstrate that proportionality?
I think as I said, from a policing point of view, wouldn't it be lovely with 43 police forces, we probably all use 43 different versions of a risk assessment.
Yeah, of course.
And I will probably go grey and probably chuntering to myself to my grave that the fact that we can't even get that right. But we in Surrey, we do push that risk assessment. We've just refreshed our repeat and vulnerable victims process to embed that risk assessment in as that first starting point. But what I would say to police officers, what I'd say to Officer Nicole here, if you think someone's vulnerable, treat them as vulnerable. Doesn't matter what the risk assessment comes out from. It's a guide, but don't let it guide you. If again, and we'll talk about segue in Sharon for the next question. But if it feels you need to do something, whether the risk assessment tells you to do it or not to do it. But there is a little bit of an art to that. and that then comes down to training and making sure that your policy and procedure are fit for purpose. Otherwise, I think transactionally people will just do that risk assessment and move on to the next thing.
Yeah, of course. Again,
I
it's
think
just
it's
like
that
going
trust
beyond
your gut,
compliance.
isn't it?
Trust your gut. Yeah.
Trust your gut, and then actually going back to point one, document your rationale.
Yeah, and I think the risk assessment can be quite impersonal if you just use it as a tool. So to listen to someone and go, do you know what? Even if the risk assessment is saying this is standard, and even actually if your gut says, I'm not sure there's much I can do here, the fact that person's in a room with you or on a call with you and has been telling you that their life is impacted by what's going on, there's a responsibility that we need to do something, because as probably all know on this call, if you just ignore it and kind of go, well, it'll go away, it tends not to, and then you end up dealing with something a lot seriouser. That's not English, is it? More serious. She says Monday morning. So whilst it's good to have in your pocket, it's good to use it, but just don't let it be that main driver of what the decision you make next to support that victim or deal with the offender. And I think, again, it'd be interesting. Obviously, people listening on the call here, I've not seen many risk assessments for offenders. I think that's probably something also we're missing in the ASB world. Is there something that makes someone a more high risk offender than somebody else? So if anyone's got one of those, I'd like to share it with the group. I'd be interested in that.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jo. Obviously, if anybody does have those types of risk assessments, please feel free to put your comments in the chat, and hopefully we can talk about them later on the call. Katie, over to you to sort of take on the next gem. Getting through them quite fast. It's good.
So gem 3 comes from our associate Jess in relation to professional curiosity, and what she has said is, don't assume the presenting issue tells the whole story. Ask questions, explore the wider context, and continually, linking in back into gem 2, continually reassess risk, vulnerability and support needs throughout the case. So I'm going to come to Sharon. Can you share an example of a case where the presenting issues led to assumptions being made, and how looking beyond that assumption revealed a different picture?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just before I give you that example, professional curiosity is the posh way of saying the so what, isn't it? It's the so what. It's so important. The so what is everything. So I'll share an example. It's my own example when I was a very new ASB officer. In fact, it was my first case, and I took a call from someone who was incredibly distressed. She was crying. She was a new mum, but she also had a toddler in reception or whatever that class is. I'm too old to remember what they call that now. And the teacher had pulled her to one side, apparently, or this is what she was telling me, because her son was falling asleep in school, and what was this connected to? And embarrassingly, she'd had to say that it was her neighbour that was deliberately targeting her. She didn't know why. And I listened to this story and I just accepted everything she told me. She presented as completely credible. And I did that dreaded thing that I will never stop saying when I'm delivering training, is I did that whole leave it with me, because I absolutely, in that moment, she confirmed to me all the reasons why I was now an ASB officer, because I was going to solve this problem for her and I was going to give her her life back. And how dare her neighbour deliberately bang on the pipes or whatever it was that was causing the noise. But I did my due diligence. This neighbour had very helpfully told me that the woman downstairs, so this was just for context, it was 4 flats in a low-rise block in a very leafy part of Surrey, and she was in the upstairs one side, and she very helpfully told me that her neighbour downstairs was experiencing exactly the same problem, and our alleged perpetrator was downstairs on the opposite side, and this noise was banging through the whole property. And she also very helpfully told me that the man upstairs, he was a single man, he was a bit of a recluse, he was deaf, so this wouldn't be affecting him, so I could spare my very precious time and not worry about him. Anyway, I sent out my diary sheets, and I also installed a noise recorder and did everything that I needed to do. And I'd written to the alleged perpetrator and told her that I'd received allegations of noise and that we might record this, and I covered all of that off, and I'd invited her in for an interview after reviewing the first lot of noise recordings, which absolutely reflected what she had been told, what she had said to me, and diary sheets from the neighbour downstairs, who I never spoke to, but I didn't need to because we were emailing, and they pretty much mirrored what my reporting party was telling me. Now, you have to remember that this was probably 30 years ago now. Not that it excuses anything, but having sent the alleged perpetrator a few appointments to come in and see me, and cold calling and knocking and leaving calling cards, at the end, all that did, I had a bit of confirmation bias going on, and I had absolutely made the decision that she was avoiding me because she knew exactly what she was doing. And I served a notice of seeking possession, and that was ticking along, and I had all my evidence and everything else was going on. And then on one particular day, two things happened. The first thing that happened was my manager went to across the road to the council chambers, had a chat with the housing, the councillor for housing, and came back, and he wanted to know about this case. I thought, well, this is all very interesting. Why are you asking me about this case? You know, here it is. And I told him, this is all my evidence. This is where I'm going with this. And I'm super proud of myself for having fully investigated this case. And he had a copy of the notice that someone, a friend of the resident that lived there, had seen this notice and wanted to know what it was about, because the woman that lived there with her young family, English was not her first language. I didn't know that. I didn't check the file. So I'd sent her these appointment letters, and she potentially did not understand them. The second thing to note about this resident was she was receiving treatment for terminal illness and was in a very poor state of health. So I sort of had this moment of, oh, well, anyway, you can't argue I've got the recordings. And the second thing that happened, and they were almost back to back, you couldn't make this up. But a colleague of mine was investigating a case that was going on in the block next door. I won't share you what that was, but one of the victims of that case was a child, and that child's mum was the neighbour downstairs who was corroborating all of the evidence. And in that moment where she was talking to my colleague and describing the stress that she was under for this case that her child was a victim in, and she was talking about all the additional pressures, she included that the neighbour upstairs was forcing her to bang on the radiator so that she could make recordings. She was forcing her to write diary sheets and diary entries because she wanted them out. And as if this case couldn't get bad enough, and I know it's a really long example, but it's absolutely worth sharing. This behaviour was driven by hate. This woman upstairs did not want a family of colour, the black family. She didn't want them in her block. And this case was orchestrated in a deliberately targeted attack on her very vulnerable neighbour. And I was the vehicle being used for that purpose. We didn't talk about hate behaviour then, but this was absolutely driven by racism. And I don't know if you can imagine, I just got goosebumps thinking about it. this case has stayed, and the level of detail in this case has stayed with me because of that impact. And can you imagine how that made me feel? So I will just conclude by saying that what we did was I served a notice on the woman upstairs, and she was evicted. She lost her flat in that very leafy part of Surrey and had to then go through the process of making a homeless application and all of those things. And I did displace her, and two wrongs don't make a right, but that behaviour was unacceptable, and she had to feel the consequence of that. And it also was the only thing that I felt would help me get over that, was to take action against her. So professional curiosity would have spared me some of that had I not just let that evidence sit in on my lap. Had I gone and spoken to the woman downstairs, had I asked her a few questions about why these accounts practically mirrored, and when do we ever see them literally a reflection? There should be similarities, there should be patterns that we pick out, but you'll very rarely see things with the same words used and the same descriptives used. And I didn't challenge any of that, I just accepted it all. And that was 30 years ago, and it feels as fresh telling you that I've got the golf ball in my throat. I could absolutely cry about this case all over again. It's so important. What is reported to us isn't always the full picture. We've got to ask questions to find out a bit more. It's the so what that is so important. Anyway, I'll be quiet.
Yeah, no, that's a really, we're on about lessons learned through our career. That is definitely one that speaks volumes, and I think everybody's face on the three of us when you were saying that was it just a bit in shock. But absolutely, we definitely need to dig deeper to get that full picture. Gem 6 is again from Rochelle, our associate, in relation to escalating serious concerns. And Rochelle has highlighted the fact that if you believe there is a significant risk, don't assume one referral is enough. Make sure we pester and pester and pester, because you can only do what's within your control. So making sure we can clearly communicate and escalate and persist when necessary is absolutely important. So I'm going to come to Jo on this one. How do you persist and professionally challenge when you have those significant concerns without damaging those partnership relations? And I think, again, it's that fine balance. So Jo, over to you.
Oh, isn't that an easy question? Not. I think, again, 24 years, you do learn some skills, and I wonder, if you're a brand new newbie working in the world of partnership, whether you're, again, police officer, housing officer, and you do feel that something is escalating, and you feel you can't be heard, and you feel you're holding the risk. It can be really, really difficult, because sometimes you have to challenge other agencies. But I suppose the first thing for me, what I've learned and what I tell all the new police officers that are kind of come through our training program is, and what I would also say when I'm, having conversations with my housing colleagues is, first thing is come in peace, not in war. Try and build strong relationships that will stand to some challenge. I don't mind being challenged. I'm not going to fall out with you. I'm not going to kind of decide to kind of, close you off my lists of people that I'll talk to. If that challenge is done with professional courtesy and with, some time spent to kind of make me understand. And, I've done that loads of times over the years. I can remember as being a very new ASBO case builder, as we were called, back in the early 2000s. Who was brought in to get more ASBOs. That was what the kind of the three-line whip from the Labour government at the time: respect to gender, ASBOs. We need to be using these more. And whilst I could see the point in that very, very early on. Remember, I'd come from a leisure background, not actually been in the world of policing, at all, or community safety. It was very obvious early on, talking to other agencies that were supporting offenders of ASB who were potentially going to be having these ASBOs, to actually listen to what makes people potentially be more susceptible to causing ASB. And I suppose one of the ones I learnt very early on was around conditions in an ASBO to control drinking. So my naivety, it was, I've got someone in the town centre who's street homeless, drinking loads, causing lots of problems. So I'll tell you what, the best thing to do is stop them buying alcohol. And I can remember there was a chap called Hayden Morris, who was a 6'7" chief exec of the drug and alcohol service that we were using in Surrey. And he brought me into his office and told me very, very quickly about the risks of people that are alcohol dependent, stopping them buying alcohol. And it was like, I completely get this. I know I could have gone, oh, he's a bit scary, I'm not gonna listen to that. But again, what started off as quite a scary challenge actually became a great kind of friendship and kind of advocate between both Surrey Police and the charity. So you need to listen. Doesn't mean to say you're always going to agree, but I think it helps then if you need to escalate it, because sometimes you will need to escalate it. And one of the things I say to colleagues who aren't in policing, feel free to challenge the police. They don't always get it right, but it can be quite scary. We are the police, a lot of people don't know how it works, or etc. But challenge, the same way as I would say to my team, we challenge adult social care. We feel we've got a cuckoo victim that's not getting the right care they need, we need to challenge. But before we challenge, it's always, again, understand that partnership landscape. So who can you have a conversation with before you escalate it? Bearing in mind, if it's really serious, you might not have time on your hands to do it. But ideally, get to know who those people are. Some of these statutory agencies do have escalation processes. But what I would say, in a time of crisis, trying to find the website with the right page that talks about the right form and who you need to send it to and when you might get a reply back can be really frustrating, and actually it doesn't help you as the person at that point holding the risk with those individuals. So trying to do that takes the stress off, but the one thing you should not do is stop challenging. If you think there's an issue, the time that you stop passing on information, because what's the point of passing it on? A bit like we say to victims of ASB ourselves, we want to hear from you. But the time you do that is the time there's some real vulnerabilities there. Because in theory, if that agency isn't very good, what they can be saying is, well, if you'd have told us, we'd have done something about it. It doesn't matter that you told them 10 times before. The fact is, the one time you didn't say anything was the one time that things actually didn't go very well, can leave you open to maybe some criticism. So one of the things I'll also say to you keep on doing it, but keep it professional. Go to your line manager, go to somebody else, your community safety manager, say, look, I'm having real problems here trying to get my point across. We understand the thresholds, especially for our statutory agencies, but I'm still here and I'm still having to deal with someone that I think is quite vulnerable, because it may not be the statutory agencies who do anything, but it might be somebody else in the voluntary third sector, etc. that might be able to help you with it. So keep on doing it. One of the other things I learnt, probably again 10 years ago, was around kind of housing associations, board of trustees. Now, I never knew they existed, but just having a conversation with someone saying, could you tell me who your board of trustees are, please? Seems to have the desired effect. It's a shame it has to happen. The other one that I use is, can I see a copy of your tenancy agreement and your ASB plan, please? Just to make sure that we're all on the same page. But I think it's a skill and it's an art to learn, to negotiate and to be strong in your conviction, but also being professional, because you're still going to have to work with these people. the next
Yeah.
week, the next month. So it's getting to know what that partnership landscape is and ask for help. If no one's hearing you, then go and find someone that will and can maybe advocate on your behalf. But don't stop reporting out.
Absolutely. And I guess where you've reported it once, like I said, for those victims or those perpetrators who you've got concern for, it's still there. So if it's still there, actually putting that referral in again demonstrates that persistence and that problem isn't going anywhere. And until you kind of notify those agencies that this isn't going away and this is continuing, so actually we need to, there's that pattern, and we've got to manage this risk and put something in place. But having that, like we said, that mutual respect, we've all got different specialisms and actually we've all got something to contribute to the table. So sometimes it's an education piece between the various agencies to understand, because we're all working to the same aim. So it's
Cup of
just
tea and
understanding that.
biscuits,
Yeah,
I always think works. Come and have a cup of tea and a biscuit, and let's see if we can work our way through this. But for me, it's about build those relationships now, build them while there isn't a crisis to be managing, and it'll be much better received as and when you need somebody.
yeah, absolutely.
Oh.
Okay, sorry Sharon, did you want to come in there?
No, I was
No.
just giving a thumbs up to the tea and biscuits.
Yeah, absolutely. Relationships don't magic themselves overnight, so you've really got to nurture them. So I'm going to come to Gem 4, which is shared between our associate Kathy and Jess about communication and expectation, managing expectations. Communication remains one of the biggest causes of customer complaints, as we know. And often it's not the decision itself that causes frustration, but it's a lack of understanding about what is happening. And kind of sometimes we make those vague remarks that we have it in hand, etc. But yeah, a lack of understanding of why a decision has been made and what happens next. People are more likely to accept the outcome if they truly understand how it's been reached. And I think there's plenty of times when I've been working with victims where they had no clue about what was happening in their case, and not because they hadn't been communicated with regularly, but the content of the communication was what they didn't actually understand, and they were just agreeing that they did understand it and they didn't. So how do you, my question would be, how do you ensure that communication with victims is not only regular but also clear, accessible and genuinely understood, especially when we're dealing with explaining complex processes? Yes, we're used to dealing with this, but members of the public might not have the expertise, well, they won't have the expertise and knowledge we do. So when you're explaining those complex processes, decisions or case updates, how do we make sure they've clearly understood that? So I'm going to come to Sharon with this one.
Thanks. And this is going to sound a bit old-fashioned again, but it's asking, isn't it? It's asking the question. Did you understand? We've all become pretty good at something comes in, responding, send the email out, send the letter out, and we've all got this ever increasing amount of tasks to complete. We're spinning lots of plates, we've got lots going on. It's easy for us to just send out the update to the reporting party, the victim, and say, I've sent a warning letter. I've sent a warning letter to your neighbour. What does that mean? If I've reported something that's causing me, in the very least, nuisance and annoyance, but at worst, harassment, alarm, distress, it's having an impact on me that's been so great, I've called up to report it. If I'm told my neighbour's been sent a warning letter, I've already got this expectation that that's going to solve it. So we need to have those conversations with people about, this is what I'm doing, but this is what it means. And that might be I'm sending a warning letter, But that doesn't mean it's a solution, because that's what it sounds like. It actually needs an explanation that says, this is an early intervention, not a guarantee of change. And these things are better done in conversation than in an email or in a letter. So it sounds very old-fashioned, but picking up the phone or knocking on the door, and lots of you on the call will be thinking, I haven't got time for this. But if you could have one telephone conversation or 13 tasks, because it keeps coming back, your time is better spent having the conversation. Your time is better spent knocking on the door and just going through it and just checking that understanding. But even when you think you've explained it, you might need to leave the door open so that they can come back and ask more questions, so that they fully understand it. Because it's not until you have that full understanding can you accept. Having that clarity is what helps to build the trust. Our residents, the tenants, the victims, I think need to understand three things. They need to understand what we did, what it means, and what next. Those three things. And within your explanation, and sometimes it will be via email and sometimes it will be via letter, but if you, when you're rereading it, before you hit send in your speed to let me just chuck this out, let me just bang this response out, if you can satisfy yourself that those three things have been met, so I've explained what I did, I've added the line of what that means, and then I've done the what next, that will buy you that trusted relationship, and they will be satisfied until the next call. And don't forget to mark it in your calendar to remind yourself. Won't go back and talk about age getting the better of some of us with our memories. Thank you for noting that, Katie. But it's really important that we remember, and we're not going to remember that I need to phone number 15, number 12. I'm not going to remember who I need to call on what frequency. So I've got to note it somewhere if my system isn't smart enough to tell me that this reminder call is coming up. It's really, really important. Even when we've got no real progress, having that call, that consistent messaging can be just as important and can make a huge difference. Putting in that call that says there's no change this week, but we're still monitoring. What does that do? That actually sends a message that they've not been forgotten. They don't need to remember to call us again for an update. When those customer satisfaction surveys go back, so far too frequently, the scores are well, they have that negative, the scores come down because were you kept informed? No. Did you understand what was going on? No. Sometimes it's not the answer, no, I can't do anything. It's not understanding. I can accept being told no. That goes back to what Jo was just saying. Being told no isn't the issue. Being told no and not understanding, being told no and having the door shut in your face is what causes the problem. That can be the root cause of the complaint, not the fact that you couldn't do something. So that for me is the key.
That brings me nicely actually onto kind of a second question there, in terms of lots of people report things believing them to be ASB, and actually after that kind of triage piece is recognizing that they're not. How do we have that conversation and communicate that to the reporter without them feeling dismissed and not listened to and still supported? Because regardless of a source of noise, for example, it's still impacting on that person.
But it's recognizing that, isn't it? If you start that conversation with, I can hear that this is having an impact on you. Thank you for reporting it. So you're acknowledging those feelings just by saying, I can hear or I can see that this is having an impact. I haven't committed to anything. but already I've bought their trust to some degree because I've acknowledged their feelings, and I haven't gone on to say I'm not going to do anything. But we're all Google warriors. They might read that ASB threshold as nuisance and annoyance in a housing related setting. I can think of 101 things. I can think of 501 things that cause me nuisance and annoyance. But are they all antisocial behaviour? No. So we have to explain it, and we need to explain that what nuisance and annoyance means from an evidential perspective and from a legal pathway. And we need to talk about proportionality, and we need to talk about otherwise reasonable behaviour and unreasonableness and how we make those determinations. And that's when we talk about frequency and duration, and we might get into the conversation of lifestyle clashes. And we have to have these conversations. You are never going to get your point across about the complexities of how to assess that threshold if you expect to just do it in an email or in a letter. You have to put the time in for the call. Better still, see them in their environment, because if you see them in their environment, your assessment of this doesn't sound like anything other than normal behavior. See that person in their setting, see how they're living with isolation, complexities, their own vulnerabilities. All of a sudden, those pieces of the jigsaw start showing a picture that I can absolutely see why this person is so impacted. It doesn't take me to an ASB enforcement pathway, but it does take me to I need to support this person pathway. Because if I don't support this person, one of a few things are going to happen. Either they are going to spiral into a deeper and darker depression, and that might lead them to taking matters into their own hands, and then you have got an ASB case to manage, but you've got a vulnerable perpetrator who took matters into their own hands through arguably your lack of managing the situation. Or they're going to harm themselves because they can't cope with it anymore. And none of us ever want to be in either of those situations. So if we just took the time, that those of you that have been on one of our trainings, or if you'll remember this, but if you haven't, go on YouTube and look at that 11 Years of Misery, Fiona Pilkington. the summing up from the through the coroner's inquiry was, if someone had just sat her down with a cup of tea, they would have joined up the dots, they would have understood the impact. So don't dismiss something as otherwise reasonable behaviour because you know you could put up with it. You know it doesn't sound unreasonable to you. Genuinely try to put yourself in the reporting party's shoes, the victim's shoes. They're taking the time to put the call in. This is having an impact. This might not have just happened. They might have built up 6 weeks worth of courage before reporting. Go and see them in their environment. Be curious. It's the so what. Why is someone making this report? Let me look behind the front door at what else is going on. And if you can't get behind the front door, and if your questions aren't being answered in a way that shines a light on something feasible, then ask yourself the question, what's gone on wrong with that relationship? And remember my example and think about whether somebody's really taken a dislike to someone and is using a reporting ASB as a pathway to get their neighbour in trouble or whatever it is.
Yeah, And just to further to add to that, it's actually recognise what's in your own policies and procedures, because actually just because something's not ASB doesn't mean that you as an organisation can't do anything. So actually looking at your good neighbourhood management policy and how you can use that to best effect would be worthwhile, because that will explore the support, the restoring neighbourly relations that you could implement to support that person who's reporting those issues. Right, so I have one final question as opposed to a gem, and I just want to come to Eva for this, because obviously many of today's gems have focused on judgment, communication, and managing risk. So before we finalise and let everyone off to go ahead with their day, how can organisations better equip officers with these skills from the outset, rather than waiting for the lessons to be learned through experience? So Eva, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Katie. I think it's really interesting sort of just hearing everybody discuss the topics and gems from today. And for me, the kind of the key theme that's kind of shone out, if you will, is it's taking your day-to-day practice beyond compliance. It's beyond the tick box, beyond the policy and procedure, beyond just process. Every point we've made, I made a couple of notes. It's looking at the rationale behind your process, how you use your risk assessment, your professional curiosity. I can't remember which associate said it, but pester, and explaining your outcomes to your tenants, not just sending them that email. Can you go to their house? Can you pick up the phone? And I think we can encapsulate all of that with training, with improving that learning for your officers. So what we try and sort of talk about at Me Learning is how organisations can equip officers with skills much earlier by being more intentional with how learning is structured from day one, rather than perhaps relying on these experiences to sort of fill the gaps at a later date. So firstly, I think it always starts with sort of strong onboarding. Any new starter needs more than just a policy and process. They need to be guided by these real world sort of exposures and decision making, these brilliant examples that Sharon shared earlier. And this is where we see scenario-based learning being really, really powerful. So if you can place your officers in more realistic ASB situations early on, they can practice that judgment, they can sort of use their risk assessments and communicate practice in a safe environment. So you've got that building of confidence before you even encounter cases in practice. I think beyond that, we need to focus on sort of ongoing support beyond just induction. So skills like professional judgment and curiosity, managing sort of risk development and managing risk developments happens over time, right? So often we talk with our customers, both within social housing and police, around how can you sort of continue professional development throughout a learner journey. So typically we see bite-sized learning being really important for that, accessible learning resources where officers can return to that when needed. How can you practice those real sort of scenarios through training resource? And typically what I find anyway is that actually this helps really reinforce those sort of key learning moments, rather than expecting, so you do your induction training, everything lands up front. I know Jo mentioned a couple of times, developing that confidence takes time. So if you have ongoing learning and support, that's typically where we see the most success. I think beyond just what you actually deliver, a key element is how you deliver it. So training on all of these topics should be available and accessible. It needs to be on demand and really aligned to real roles. So typically we see ASB training sort of, from other providers. It's standardized. It's not bespoke. It doesn't really talk about the day-to-day challenges that ASB officers might face. So we need to be able to make it accessible for learners, where individuals can find guidance quickly when dealing with challenging conversations or complex cases. And, having this accessible learning offer creates a culture where learning is supported through day-to-day work rather than sitting sort of separately from it. We don't want learners just to do their training and then forget about it the next day when they're doing their day job. It's actually, how do we embed that into their day-to-day challenges? And then I suppose, to conclude all of that ramble, from the perspective of me learning, typically this is where we see digital learning can really add a bit of value. So, for example, the sort of ASB awareness e-learning we're creating with Green and Burton, we're going to try and use as much scenario-led content as possible. So we bring that judgment and communication challenges to life really early on. So helping officers understand not just what to do, but how to approach those situations and how they can go beyond just that compliance, that tick box, that policy and process. So I suppose for me, it's ultimately moving away from that model of learning through experience to one of experienced informed learning sort of from the outset, if you will. And I think really that gives officers those tools and context so that they can succeed.
Fantastic. Thank you, Eva. And absolutely bang on time, 11 o'clock. And thank you for everybody that's joined us. So we'll come back to the questions and write up a document afterwards if there's any that we haven't answered today. But have a lovely afternoon, slightly less not as hot as it was last week, there I said, looking out the window. So yeah, thank you very much, guys, and thank you, panel, as well.
Thanks, everyone.
Day.
Thank you.
Thank you.